Welcome everyone. Hello. Hello. How are you finding the conference so far? Good? Fabulous. I think it's been fantastic, hasn't it? Really good sessions yesterday, I thought. Lots of fantastic case studies. The challenge I think you have with these types of conferences is that it's almost like everyone puts on their best makeup, don't they? It's everyone, you see the best practice that everyone wants to share. And people are reluctant, therefore, to show maybe some less best practice. And I wanted this session to be a bit more sort of open and honest, and not necessarily have our full makeup. Maybe it's kind of ironic because I've got my Madonna mic on now. Maybe a few warts to come out as well. So not only to look at best practice, but maybe to look at common practice, and maybe there's a difference between the two. So I hope this is going to be a reasonably interactive and a fairly cathartic session. I should say who I am. I'm Paul Hender. I am the head of Insight for Gorkana. And with me, I have an illustrious panel that represents expertise within the industry. We just had a workshop on understanding measurement and communications from an international perspective. We've got a truly international panel here. On my far left, we've got Mikkel Hausner, who's Director of Analytics and Insights in Infomedia in Denmark. In fact, in the previous session, we'd heard that Danes tend to have a very high opinion of themselves, and they think they're always right. But Mikkel, with more than 15 years of experience in media and stakeholder insights, I think you probably are. So definitely worth listening to. I'm very pleased that we've got Aseem Sood, who's the CEO of Impact Research and Measurement in India. Aseem's actually on the board of AMEC, as many of you know, and he co-chairs the AMEC's Asia Pacific chapter. So a lot of insight, both in terms of Indian perspective, but also clearly analysis overall. And lastly, but by no means least, is Casey Brown, who leads the Decisions Global Insights business. And Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got hubs in Chicago, Boston, London, Shanghai. So brings a truly global perspective. Now, with a bit of luck, my button will work. No, my button turns it off. There we go. That button will work. Yeah, so that is us. Now, you might be familiar with this picture. Can you see this? So, this picture was actually released by Associated Press back in 2002, and it went viral. Unfortunately, it's a hoax. It's not real, which is a real shame. In fact, if you're very eagle-eyed, you can spot why it's a hoax. I'll let the very observant of you spot why it's a hoax. But the reason I'm showing this is because I think it's important for us all to be on the same page. And I think when it comes to outcomes, I'm not sure we all are. So the name of this workshop is Moving from Outputs to Outcomes. Are we all on the same page? Well, for example, what on earth do we mean by outcomes? And I think it was very interesting. In yesterday's sessions, I was actually trying to count the number of times that the word outcome was mentioned, and actually lost count after 20. In pretty much every session, we were talking about the importance of measuring outcomes. But there seemed to be a bit of a difference in what people were saying. For example, Stuart Smith at the beginning was talking about this model of outputs, impact, outcomes. Jim McNamara, in those that came to the Black Dot of Doom session, looking at the Government Evaluation Council, Jim was talking about his model, which I think many people use, of outputs, outtakes, and outcomes. Is there a consensus here? Well, I think we can look to AMEC to help us out, and you'll notice here, this has been taken straight off of AMEC's glossary of terminology. Outputs and outcomes, what's the difference? Well, in output, in PR terms, the material and activity that PR professional generates. So press releases, emails, as well as the media coverage that is generated. Outcomes, therefore, and I'm not sure this sentence is particularly helpful, something that has happened as a result of the campaign. But the next sentence is really what it's all about. So in public relations, this would be typically defined as a measurable change in awareness, knowledge, attitude, opinion, behaviour, or reputation metrics. That's all very long-winded. So maybe more simply, output is the product of an activity, the direct product, whereas outcome is then the effect on that audience, either in terms of their perceptions or what they've then gone on and done. So far, so good. Does everyone feel comfortable with that definition? Not too many, not shaking heads anyway. Why are they important? Well, I think there's a whole host of reasons. Very common comments yesterday around the importance of tying your what you're measuring back to your objectives. And I think what outcomes do is they force that thought process. And the reason it forces that thought process is because it focuses us as on what we want to achieve with the end audience, not necessarily in what the valid metrics framework says is the intermediate effect of earned media coverage. It's therefore the ultimate gauge of what works and what doesn't work, because we're looking directly at how it's affecting the audience. I mentioned the black dot session with the Evaluation Council yesterday, and Alex Aitken mentioned the point around, he has this term, send out stuff. You know, there's a general mentality, if you're not careful, about just sending out stuff and some of it will stick. But of course, if you think about what your end audience is doing, that acts as an antidote to just sending out stuff for whatever reason, because you need to understand what is affecting that audience. If you're following on that, then it's really helping you identify a true return on investment rather than focusing on an AVE. I mean, an AVE at the end of the day is how much would this space have cost if it was an advert. It's not a return. Whereas if you're looking for an end audience effect, change of behavior, or even they're going to buy stuff, then you're actually looking at a genuine return. And finally, I mean, clearly, really importantly, again, we've talked a lot about integrated communications across paid, owned, earned media. If we're looking at outcomes rather than outputs, then that actually gives us a framework to measure across all of those different channels. Can I have a quick show of hands to make sure you're all alive? Thank you. Who would agree with these points? I'm sure there are others, but in general terms, measuring outcomes is therefore important. Yes? We all agreed with that. Right, fine. But Marion.
When I define outcomes, I define it as some kind of economic result.
Okay, this is...
Make a client come back and pay you to do this work again.
And I think that's very interesting because it comes back to this definitions point around, and I think that's one of the reasons why Jim McNamara separates out outtakes from whether people have then gone and, you know, I'm aware of a new iPhone 6, but I have actually gone and bought it. It's very different. So everyone thinks it's important, but notice what I've put in theory. And the thing about theory, as political philosopher Homer Simpson says, is that it doesn't always work in practice. And if you'll forgive me a little aside, yesterday, so Alex Aitken mentioned I come from the UK, and there's been a UK election, very big UK election recently. And the reason I mention it is that it taught us three things. The first is that the political map of the UK now looks like Maggie Simpson. The second, as Alex mentioned yesterday, is that all the political polls were wrong. All of them. And this is a really salient lesson, I think it's important for this workshop, that research has its uses, it can be useful, but it will also have its limitations. And so understanding those limitations is really important. And the third reason I mention this is be careful what you pledge. All politicians are guilty in an election of over-promising in order to get votes, and then finding themselves in a position where they can't deliver. In fact, the leader of the political party that was expected to do very well, Ed Miliband of Labour, got into trouble because he put all of the party's pledges in stone and then was heavily criticised because how were you going to follow through in practice? And that stone has now mysteriously gone missing. Now, we laugh at Ed. Yes, but he might be buried underneath it. The trouble, of course, when you pledge stuff is you might get into trouble with what happens in practice. Now, we might laugh at Ed, but we are guilty of this ourselves. So we talk about the Barcelona principles. What's the second Barcelona principle? Measuring the effect on outcomes is preferred to measuring outputs. And Marianne, to your point, then leading on into business benefits can and should be measured where possible. So, in theory, yes. Do we follow through on our promises? Well, again, let's have a quick show of hands. So, who regularly measures outputs, either in terms of audience behaviour or in terms of business results? Did I say outputs? Sorry, I meant outcomes. Thank you, Casey. Only 2 people measured outputs. Who measures outcomes? 1, 2. Okay, so this is the minority. Keep your hands up. Regularly. Right. So there's an important point there. What do you mean by regularly? So let's say more than 50% of work. Very good. But we have one. Yes. Okay. But we had one hand. And yet, all of us were saying this is important. And this is replicated in the latest AMEC World Media Insights survey. Here it is. So a bit like George Bush's book, we have the whole thing turned round. So while we're saying measuring outcomes and business results is important, look at where they are in terms of, I think the question was, do you do this work most or all of the time? And it's very low down compared to what you'd call measuring media quality and quantity is really your output stuff. And in fact, this is just AMEC member clients. Well, how many in that survey? 69. That's not okay. It represents the industry, but is that truly representative? Gorkana did a piece of research for AMEC, which is you can actually get your hands on it at our kiosk today if you want. This was an interview of 587 PRs, either in-house at corporates or in PR agencies. But they said a similar thing, really, which is that most of them measure outputs, but a much lower percentage measure outcomes and measure business results. And in fact, there seems to be, because we did this representative across the globe internationally, there seemed to be a difference between different regions, with Europe maybe being having a higher percentage than other areas. And this is what I really wanted to bring in the panel, especially from an international view. So if I could bring in Asim at this point, what's your view from, say, an Indian perspective? What do you think is common practice, and why is that?
All right. I'm going to share a few incidents to explain my points. My colleague, one of my colleagues is here with me who helps me with business development. His name is Piyush. I don't know if he's around. There are times when he's closing a deal. The deal is about monitoring and analysis. And he'll say, Asim, I would like you to join me for this last discussion wherein we're going to close the deal. And I'm on my way with Piyush to the client meeting. And in the car, he'll tell me, promise me you will not ask him about his objectives. And
let's just close the deal. Don't
so I tell him, why? You're telling me you're about to close the deal. And he says, I come across so many clients wherein the objectives are not clearly defined. And the measurement solutions that we can offer are only as good as the clarity with which objectives have been defined. And he actually makes me promise that, no, you're not going to start a discussion on outcomes. And when I visit AMEC, I meet so many colleagues. We look at award-winning case studies, and they all talk about how we started with clarity of objectives, and we went ahead and measured outcomes by actually linking the results to sales, change in behavior. And he'll say, do not talk about any of that. We just want to focus on closing this deal. And the reality is this happens in 80% of the cases. So it's not just lack of awareness, but there are times when professionals are not willing to own outcomes in their organizations. And it's not their fault, it's the system. They don't get the resources to own those outcomes.
Very good point. It's very expensive.
Yes, that's the next point, which is, there are times when the cost of measuring the impact on outcomes is so high, it exceeds the total money that they're getting for their entire project. Right? Also, there are times when they need to collect some data, which can be done internally as well, and they're not able to get that data, either because of money or because of confidentiality constraints. I've been in meetings with communications head and the marketing head, and I'm told that the communications head does not know right now what the marketing plan is because it's confidential. It'll only be shared at a later stage, but they have to start a communication program now. So, given all of this, the reality continues to be that outcome measurement, we are only able to do it with few clients. And in all other cases, I'm asked to keep quiet and sit on the side because my sales team, they want to close the deal.
Thank you. And Mikkel, if I could bring you in as well, and from a Danish or a European perspective.
It's mostly Danish, but somewhat Scandinavian, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say that I can definitely relate to that situation, but my situation is that I've been in the media industry for a year and a half or something like that, and I come from the outcomes industry. I actually came from Reputation Institute, working only with outcomes. So I have a different entry into the discussion about it, personally. But being in the media industry, I agree, maybe 5 or 10% of our clients are interested in these kinds of conversations, because most of them actually does not have a clear objective with what they do, which is very critical, I think. So what we actually did was to make a very simple conceptual framework to discuss from. So you could say, when we enter a client meeting, we start by asking them, what do we want to achieve with this? What is your main goal? What kind of effect do you want to achieve in your stakeholder groups? If you are that kind of company and you have this goal, what kind of stakeholders are the most important? What do we know about them now? And what kind of research do we have to establish to support this case and this project that we are going to enter into? I think that's a very important discussion to have, because I think we are very confused as well around the topics of tactical operational projects and strategic projects. Yesterday we listened to a lot of speeches where the main goal was to build trust. That's not something that you can measure from one single event. So that's a very strategic topic, I think. And you should discuss that in a certain way. What do you want to? Why do you want to build trust? How do you want to measure that? How can we help you do that? And then there are the tactical stuff that's something else that I think we should address in another way. But maybe I'm sidetracking a little bit, Casey, on your object here or subject. But I think if you have this framework to discuss with your clients, it also adds value to your output reports, because you as a consultant or as a company know what your client expects to achieve, and you can make more clear insights for them once you have had the discussion about what are the main objectives of this. And then output and outcome could be a discussion. How do we measure it? But if we only have the output, like in 80 or 90% of the incidents, then we could actually add value to it by having a discussion about it.
Yeah, exactly. And Casey, maybe I can bring you on this. Danish perspective, Indian perspective. Your organisation represents organisations around the world. Is this a general problem?
Well, that was what was so great when we had conversations in preparation for this. You know, our conversation was up here, and then Asim said, "Well, let me just tell you a little story, the story that he just shared with you." And he said, "You know, this is what I'm dealing with in India," and I think we all laughed because he kind of, you know, he said the emperor has no clothes, you know, that sort of thing, and we all laughed. And we were like, that's our experience. And he kind of took the shroud off of it because, yeah, there's oftentimes in a selling situation that people like don't go to objectives because it's going to slow things down. It'll, you know, and all too often, outcomes is a bridge too far. At least in the early, you know, first year or two, sometimes even with clients, to do that. And so it was great because it made the whole group take a step back and say, where are we practically? And so because his experience is not an Indian experience, it's not a Danish experience. I think it's a global experience.
Okay. I was actually interested, Marion, in your you asked a very important question, I think, yesterday to Meredith of the Beef Association around. I don't know if those you remember, but she was talking about how, in terms of measuring outcomes, they were thinking in terms of perceptions around, thought process around beef. I think you made a very valid point around, but surely the ultimate measure is consumption, because that's what you're trying to get to. And I think she made a very interesting point, which, yes, but it's almost a bridge too far. There are lots of things downstream that will other factors that affect this, and so sort of picking up on Casey's point. Are we in danger of almost leaping too far by saying outcomes are preferred to measuring outputs? Is there almost a danger that we make people jump too far? The leap of faith is too much, rather than building up a set of almost these pieces of evidence that point in that direction. Joining the dots was mentioned yesterday.
I mean, just as a comment on that specific point, one of the dangers that we could get into as an industry is overclaiming what we do. And I think sometimes when you claim you've got a reach of 1 billion, and you've got this much engagement, because those are the ways you've interpreted those measures, and then you run up against marketing, who say, well, that's all very well and good, but we've got X number of qualified sales leads. You end up undermining the credibility of all of the measurement work that you can do, and that's the bit about your point about going a bridge too far. And you do need to define the limits of what you can do. So for beef, there's a hell of a lot of sales promotion going on there by outlets who sell meat products, and there's a hell of a lot of specialised processed meat products that are also being advertised. So how could that trade association claim that end result in any credible way? And that's just a danger I would share as that bridge too far. Sometimes you have to limit yourself to what's realistically ownable.
Yes, of course.
I had to do some evaluation for a Coca-Cola campaign coming up to Cannes. You know, at Cannes time,
They never
wildly
overclaim.
overclaiming everything that's created by this little machine that 2,000 people saw. And we did find a solution to it because we said, okay, let's just go and test, because the Coke does so much, and it's for Singapore specifically. Let's just test people who are exposed to the particular piece of content, discussion around it, versus people who didn't. And we tested purchase intent, brand favorability, and then we're able to do some calculations around if purchase intent has shifted that much, what would that likely mean for future sales for Coke in that market, just as a result of that campaign. We did it for $4,000 through Facebook online survey. Have you seen this? Show the bit of video or show some kind of content around it, exposed or not, a couple of quick questions, and measure the difference.
And you're sort of isolating the effect then, aren't you?
It's too expensive, there's too many pieces of mix.
Yeah.
So sometimes actually we just don't have the balls to step up and say, let's prove that our work did it. And I work across an agency where you walk into advertising, you say, oh, good results, I see your client's growing. Yeah, it's the advertising. Straight away.
Yeah.
Chest beating.
Yeah.
In PR, we don't know if it was the PR because they also do that.
No, but you make a great point there that there are assumptions, and you state your assumptions. So we've got this sample, they've seen that, and we know if people intend this or if they have an affinity toward this brand, then we have this set of assumptions that are already accepted within the organization that we apply, multiply, go and we build it out. So that's where there's already an established set of rules, and there's an established pathway that you just have to say, I've affected one step in this pathway that I've increased the percentage this much, and so boom. I can project all the way forward here. And so that's because that outcomes-based measurement is already, the groundwork's already laid. And so that's a great example because the heavy lifting's already been done, and you only have to show application in one of these steps, that you've improved some likelihood outcome in one of these steps, and then you can claim lots of benefits. And that's a beautiful application when those already exist.
Absolutely.
But can I share a practical situation? And before I do that, I want to tell you that I'm not proposing this, but I'm telling you this is what I faced. And how many of you have been in a situation wherein you are in a discussion with a client trying to sell a measurement solution? All right, great. So I hope you're able to relate with it. If you're not, please tell me. So,
You, I see.
yes.
No, they don't let him go to those meetings. It's 'cause
So imagine you walk into a client meeting and you are there with the client and the PR agency, and you ask them, how can we help you? Are you clear with your objectives? And they say, yes, we've done a workshop and we're going to work with you, and therefore we've called you and we need your help. And you ask them, what's your objective? And they say, we want to create buzz with PR. And at that stage, we are not even in a situation to request them that let's go back and revisit what the objectives.
You're really stupid. That's the conclusion when you go, Buzz, that's not an objective. That's not an outcome. You're dumb. You're dumb, client. But sign here. We're smart.
No, but you know what happens here? We always step in late in this entire journey, and when we step in, we have to work with certain givens, and in that we are not able to challenge and say, okay, let's scrap all of that. Let's go back on the drawing board and start working on measurable objectives. And this is where the discussion gets lost, and we continue working with output metrics.
That's why I say for us, outcomes conversations usually happen like year 2,
Yeah.
year 3, because for one thing, you have historical data, you've got a relationship, you're not calling them stupid, you're saying, hey, you're coming up with your next year's planning. Why don't we look at this and look at that? But it's really tough.
So that's a great learning. This is exactly what we do now. So we first get into the relationship and say next year when you're going to do this, we would want to be in the room. We'd want to be ears in the room, and that's where we are able to prompt and say, would you like to look at this? This is how measurable objectives are defined. Would you want to read this? And when they do, I can tell you, capability is not an issue. They are very smart people. In fact, they are very smart, and that's why they are working with such programs, because then you're not liable for anything. It's
maybe in fact to do a workshop for all Indian professionals how to set up smart objectives. I think that's another thing.
not just Indian professionals. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's because it's not a capability issue. They're very smart people, and.
It's a good point. Let's bring up, we're actually trying to, for Ubiquity at Cambridge, we are sponsoring, I can't say ProcureCon this week, which is the procurement
Conference.
And what we've been trying to do is actually get in right at the beginning and say to the procurement teams, have you thought at this stage, before you even commission your advertising and marketing campaigns, about integrating communications effectiveness, but also the measurement of that? Because we're saying that what happens now is that we come right at the end, where they haven't got budgets, and so it's all about re-educating teams and procurement to make sure they're thinking about that at the beginning? I don't know how it's going to work. First,
So I think there's some very interesting points here around being earlier in the conversation, but also, and we want to explore this a bit later on, about working across an organisation as well, not just being sort of sitting on the end of a PR, which in itself might be sitting on the end of an organisation. I want to just bring it back to the point that Colin made earlier on about over-claiming. And I wanted to give you a heroic failure. And Jeremy's probably going to kick me now for giving you this example. But
You've already got the hardware in the office. So
yes. I think it's as important, though. So I'm going to give you an example. This is a piece of work we did for the Museum of London. So it's a big London museum. And we submitted it for the AMEC Awards in 2013, and it won gold. So it was seen as best practice. And one of the reasons it won gold, and if I can whiz, there's a few slides here and I'll get through to, here we go. In outcome measurement, you get lots of wiggly lines. So we got lots of wiggly lines here. What we're able to show was the pink bars were media coverage, the green bars were website traffic, and the blue line as visitor numbers. And that was the key one, because what they were trying to do is get increased visitor numbers. I think they were trying to increase visitor numbers by 20% in 2013. And they were doing this by running a series of big exhibitions, which you can see with the peaks. And we did lots of correlation analysis that showed this really strong link between media coverage and visitor numbers. The judges concurred and thought this was a very sophisticated piece of work, and it won gold. And I was so chuffed with this that I then used it in a workshop with a PR agency. And I was saying, this is how you can measure outcomes. And there's a guy at the back of the PR agency that stuck his hand up, and I knew he was going to be trouble. And it wasn't Colin, no. And the guy said, that exhibition there, which one was that? And I explained it was the Dickens in London exhibition. He said, I thought it was. I went to that. Oh, no. And the reason I went to that was because I saw poster adverts on the London Underground tube, and they were all over the tube. And you could see I was presenting to like a group like you, and I was thinking, oh, shit. And you become undone. And this is the point that we can do all sorts of clever things in showing correlations, but there's a really important statement: correlations does not mean causation. And the problem we've got is we live in an integrated world. So you don't always, there are occasions, and you mentioned earlier on, where you can isolate the example and you can then link it back to the outcomes, but many times we can't because you're part of integrated paid-owned media campaigns. And I want to bring Casey, you on this as well, because I think you've got some experience about how you can isolate the PR effect. Yeah. And in fact, I think it's probably illustrated by this cartoon here, where, Colin, to your point, everyone overclaims, and therefore, when you add it all together, the total contribution is clearly more than 100%.
Yeah, we do a fair amount of work with econometricians. So, who are doing different econometric models, particularly marketing mix models for, say, our consumer packaged goods clients, and they're quick to show this sort of thing. Is everybody wants to run the model, and anytime a group does their own research in their own silo, they're claiming full credit for all of the lift. Any incremental sales, any incremental traffic or whatever, they're attributing to their campaign, or not even necessarily their campaign. It's like their lever on the campaign. And this is a perfect example of that. When we were having a discussion one time, he sent me this this cartoon, which I thought was great. And I spend an awful lot of my time with very enthusiastic clients who say we want to do outcomes research. You've got 3 years worth of data of what we've done from a news perspective and a social perspective. Now tell us how it attributed to sales. And sometimes, okay, can you give me your sales figures? Well, no, that's proprietary. Well, how am I supposed to tie it to sales if you can't give me sales? Well, can you tie it to something else? Well, what can you give me? And it's like, oh, I can give you the name of our PR agency. Like we're not going to get very far. But we, to Colin's point, we try not to overstate our claim as to what we can do. So what I always tell people is, if a model exists within your company, you want to inject yourself into that model. You don't want to come up with your own, because to your point, somebody else is going to lay claim to it. As soon as you get into a room where you're starting to say, hey, look, this is what we've done, lots of other folks are going to step up and say they did it. So we spend, I spend an awful lot of my time training our clients. Look, these are all the details that are involved if you want to do this. And then going to the econometricians, these modelers, and explaining to them what PR data is. Because oftentimes they've tried this before and they've got really bad data that they've found no correlations for. There's no explanatory power in the data that they've injected before. And so there's a lot of education on both sides. But the only way that anybody really believes it is if somebody else, independent of the public relations function, is running the model, and then it includes all of the other major marketing levers. So it is expensive, it's complex, and I think one of the things that came up in our conversation is it's something that they end up only running perhaps on an annual basis. In some billion-dollar brands are running it maybe semi-annually, but it's not something that's done real quickly.
No, and therefore you're not necessarily getting the real-time insight back that you need to manage in a 24/7
You can't manage the
news
function.
environment.
You can't manage the function off of this.
No, exactly. I want to take this point a bit further, actually, because I think there's a bit of an interesting crossroads here, which is that there's probably a couple of points of view. One point of view is that as a measurement industry, we maybe lack the skills to measure outcomes. For example, how many of us have econometricians that know what they're doing? And the reason for that, and this is a hypothesis to you guys, is that many of us have a background of media measurement. We're measuring the media, we're counting clips, increasingly measuring social media, but the concept's the same. And therefore, measuring outputs is very natural to us, whereas measuring outcomes is less natural. And obviously, interesting, you made the point earlier on about, but we do market research a lot, and I know some measurement businesses also have that capability, but I'm not sure that's. Yes. So the question is, we probably want to abandon mics, I think. The question is, should we should the industry develop these skill sets, as you've sort of suggested there? Or, to Casey's point, is it actually important that we start working with those skills in other parts of the organisation? I'm not just saying in measurement business, I'm talking about in our client organisations. And just open this out to the floor. Paul, maybe you're.
We need microphones for the camera.
Okay.
Paul Njoku, UK government. Just in response to that question, I think it's important that you guys begin to work with organisations. There is a danger here that what you define as an outcome is not necessarily the outcome that the business is looking for. I'll just go back to our colleague on the panel who worked with the Reputation Institute. For me and for a lot of my departments, enhancing the reputation of a UK government department is a business outcome. A lot of the activities that happen on the press and media side, given that reputation, for example, is forged based on people's experience, but more importantly, what we say about ourselves and indeed what others say about us, the latter two which are influenced by a lot of the PR activity, the press office activity, clearly feeds into that. And we don't see that as an outcome. We clearly see all that as well as the other interventions as well, particularly happening on some of the operational side where things like customer service is a key driver as feeding into that overall model.
Miguel, do you want to pick up on that?
No, I think that's a good point, but actually I just wrote down, we are still discussing the definition of outcome, because is outcome economic or business related, or is it reputation? Is it perceptional?
It's what you agree with your client.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that also. But that was another thing that I just wrote down, because what you said, Casey, was we need to get into the, or you also said it, Asim. The maturity of our clients is the one thing that's most important for the discussion about outcomes. If we have had a relationship with them for 1 or 2 years, we're past the output. We've been there a couple of times, so now we are ready to discuss outcomes. And I think that's a very important point. But another one related to what we are discussing now is: do we have the right methodology here in our industry? Do we have the right tools, or should we outsource it?
Well, maybe back to you. Hand that back to you. What would your view be? Do you think the industry needs to develop its own skills, or do you think that the industry needs to work collaboratively with other people that have got those skills and are using them in other departments? I mean, an example is advertising. Many, particularly consumer organisations, have insights teams, customer insights teams, large analytical departments where they're building these models. And it's very interesting when I have conversations with clients how few of them understand or even aware that this is going on within their own organisation. Yeah. So half the battle is to encourage those, your clients, to actually have conversations internally, and you need to explain to them that they shouldn't necessarily be frightened of this.
Let me answer that question. If we were to do outcome measurement for our clients, today we are doing that, but we are only doing that for 10 clients. If you were to ask me to do outcome measurement for hundreds of clients that we have, I don't think we have the capability to do that. And yes, we will have to reach out to somebody who's able to offer us that capability. So while we can work on those 10 clients, send award entries, win awards, but yes, we cannot offer it for all our clients.
Okay, that's an interesting point. There's a question over there. Oh, sorry, you've got the microphone, yeah.
Sorry, Arnaud Steinkohler from France, Argus de la Presse. It's very interesting what we're discussing, obviously. I heard here we don't have the balls to do it. And I understand that there's a fear in the PR industry to be having really metrics of outcomes, because sometimes they just fear that they're not going to have the link between what they're doing and what really is going on. And maybe as a whole trade association, we have a role to sometimes illustrate really precisely, like the advertisement market did it with the GRP, for example. At a certain moment, they just did, well, there is correlation between the two. Maybe if we can prove it for some major campaigns, then you would have the PR industry understanding that there is this, and then there will be more credit and more investment in PR, and then you have the money that we don't always have to prove return on investment. That's one point. Another point that I was wanting to underline is that it is also about creativity. If you want to measure things, maybe it's interesting to bring it a little bit around and saying, okay, here is the journey that I want to make possible for my further customer, my future customer. That's what I want to achieve with this journey. So how am I going to track the different steps that he's going to make to get there? And that's an interesting point, because you can do it on very specific things. And then saying, okay, let's put PR together, and let's think about how we can make this possible. And that's how sometimes with Asim, I agree, we can enter at the first place in the conversation, saying, well, let's think all together how this is going to be possible, because it's not always, well, we know that PR come a lot from education, from literature, and well, in France at least, and they're not really in the mathematics and all that. But we sometimes come from that. So the talent can be associated with the measurement and have new ideas, saying, okay, let's do it this way, because this way we're going to be able to track it all the way long.
But I'll say it's not fear, it's lack of motivation. We've not been able to encourage our clients to do that. In fact, I have a page, I don't know if you want to jump to that page, wherein
Yeah.
I've actually tried to list down what are the barriers. And, it starts with looking at, they tell me, it requires jointly working with so many other departments in the organization. I don't have the bandwidth to do that right now. They tell me, we'll create fancy models. I must tell you, we actually hired ex-McKinsey analytics experts, got a fancy model working, and we took it to a client. We sold it to the client, and at the end of it, the client said, "It's too complex. I can't sell it to my CEO. Sorry, doesn't work." And we've made that mistake. We made it too complex. At times, in their setups, nothing changes for them, even if they were to sign up for outcomes. What changes for them? You look at performance pays that they get. It's not linked to outcomes. Today, we have stopped working with clients on AVEs, except one client, which is the client that we started working with when we were founded. Only reason we work with them on AVEs is because internationally, their performance pay depends on AVE that they generate. That's how it is. So these models are there. Then now, all PR professionals are very smart people. They want to do well. They come back and say, when you do outcome measurement, typically it's post-mortem. You'll come back, you will take your time, you'll come back and say, okay, now these are the results of the study, and what do I change? Whereas, when we do quick output measurement, we are able to make changes in our program. And with outcome measurement, we are testing whether my strategy is right or not. With output measurement, I'm able to test whether my execution is right or not.
Yeah, you queued that up by talking about in the advertising industry, they went ahead and they settled on GRPs, and they said, well, we've proven out in 3 cases that GRPs lead ultimately to awareness, which ultimately lead to sales. So we're going to go ahead and we're not going to keep tracking that every minute of every day. We're just going to push for GRPs. And we're going to do assumptions, kind of like you did with Coca-Cola. We're going to deliver this quick metric that we are going to assume a bunch of things on. Well, our clients who are doing outcome measurement, they're running an annual or semi-annual update on their model that says, yes, as you say, strategically, these linkages still hold true. But contrary to what Principle 2 of the Barcelona Principles would tell you, that tracking outputs would be wrong. Well, no, outputs, they're measuring what their activities are yielding, and you can do that daily or intraday to say how effective are we delivering, and then they're plugging that into a model. And I think in most instances, people are operating off that assumption that the linkage takes place, and that it is driving awareness, it's driving preference, it's driving purchase, even though maybe they haven't had the discipline, the balls, they haven't had the funding or whatever it is to do that initial study. So I wish we could propose an amendment. We Americans like our amendments to our founding documents, and I wish we could somehow amend it, because I think you make a great point that if we're to measure, if we're to provide insights that are going to drive decisions, those decisions need to be made quickly, not post-mortem. And I think outputs measurements are very useful and are actually preferred to outcomes measurements in that short period.
I'm wondering if it's that there's almost a journey of stepping stones. You had join the dots.
Yeah,
mentioned a lot yesterday, and it's actually you work from output towards the different ways of measuring outcomes, and you need to understand, going back to the point that's been mentioned a few times around those outcomes need to be aligned with what the organization's objectives are in the first place.
I think the key to it is there have to be the stated assumptions. They have to be able to say the reason we're measuring this output is because we assume that.
No, it's then linked to an output.
Yeah,
which is then linked to an overall
And if somebody
objective.
says, "I think your assumptions are wrong," they can say, "Well, help fund us doing the outcomes measurement to prove out this model."
Yeah.
But the thing is, they don't state the assumptions that we're doing this because it's going to drive that.
Yeah. So let me make a plug now. For there's a session later on, right at the end of today, which is going to be looking at some thoughts about how to take the valid metrics framework forward and to make it a bit more simple and to work across different channels, paid, owned, and earned. But to exactly that point, that it shows a journey from understanding what your output should be through to your outputs, but those in turn are linked to your overall objectives, and then it's the thought process back again to make sure that those outputs are right in the first place because they're all aligned.
Paul, Jeremy from AMEC and Gorkano. I was actually just about to make that plug. You made it for me. There are going to be 2 sessions. There'll be one. We're going to run a session this afternoon about how we're going to make measurement mainstream. And a lot of it is going to be about awareness and promoting the work that we've already done. There'll be 2 sessions, 2 breakouts. One will be looking at the 2 frameworks we've created and how we can develop an integrated framework and promote that. The second will be what do we need to do to get better awareness of the Barcelona principles. And Casey, if you want to propose an amendment, that's the opportunity to do it. That'll be David Gallagher and Chris Foster are heading that session. So I'd ask you to go along and make your case.
Thank you. Any final questions before we're running out of time? So probably another couple.
Is not a question. It's just sharing our experience in Latin America. I come from Colombia. We have a media evaluation company, and media evaluation in Latin America is something that is not done in a regular basis, and it was something very new in Colombia. Our experience, we have experienced every single problem that all of you have mentioned here. What has worked for us, I don't know if it's some sort of luck, but usually when a customer or when the people that we sit down to offer our services understands what we do, the negotiation is hours or probably a couple of days when they hire us. So for us, it's not a matter of which is the company who needs the service, because we have sit down with many of them, but it's the precise profile that we sit down to negotiate. So we already are in the capacities to identify this is going to work really fast. So now our marketing efforts are going towards trying to identify where those profiles are working in the companies, because we know that our sales success will be much higher. No, so it's a big challenge for us. It has been a big challenge. We have been suffering of all the problems here. And we have also found, but we have been able to work with PR companies that they need what we do to validate that what we're doing is working. And we're only specialized in measuring the outcomes. We don't do anything else that is not measuring outcomes. So it's a small group of customers, high-profile customers, government customers, and it's been very tough for us. But it's good to feel that we're not alone, that everybody is suffering from the same problem. So that's what we're doing down there in Latin America.
Good, thank you. And one final question.
Andreas from Sponsor Insight Sweden. You talked about clients that doesn't have any objectives. When you have clients who doesn't have any outcome objectives, output is, and especially AVE, is easy for the client to show internally how the campaign has been doing and so on. How do you approach the clients who only has AVE objectives or so on, output objectives? How do you approach them when they say they want to measure AVE?
I can say this for India. In India, for clients who are asking, new clients who are asking for AVE-based measurement, we say no to them. We've stopped offering solutions based on AVE. And in the case wherein we are offering that AVE-based solution, along with that, we've been supplying another solution to them at our cost, which is not based on AVE. We have not been able to sell this solution to them still, but we continue to offer that as well. But for new clients, we are not offering any solutions based on AVE.
Mikhail, maybe you can...
No, that's fine. We just hold on to public ridicule.
Exactly.
Yes.
We do. I start marking cases down or rejecting cases for awards if they have AVE in them, going back and telling them why. And the other thing I was going to say is packaging the great work that you do is to everyone in the room, the big lesson that we've learned at Ogilvy is we've got to market what we do in this area. So if anyone was in my previous session, I showed a Strepsils case video. We're making more and more case videos of what we do in the business results because clients are saying, I want what you did for them. How do we get one of those? And then you can end the conversation with the people who don't know and say, give us one of those. And we use them as a new business tool.
And I think that's a perfect point to end because I think it's by educating people on genuine examples of where it works. And after this AMEC Summit, we'll have another load of examples on AMEC's website with the awards. I think we can then use that to share amongst our clients. So thank you very much for joining us. And I also want to say big thanks to the panel as well, if you give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Here we go.